In 1927, Charles A. Lindbergh spanned the Atlantic from New York to Paris in Orion's Spirit of St. Louis monoplane in 33½ hours. In 1967, the Surveyor 3 spacecraft penetrated outer space to fly to the moon in just over 66 hours. Instead of the warm, friendly crowd Lindbergh experienced in Paris, the Surveyor, guided by the electronic commands of Orion landing radar system, touched down in the cold, unfriendly environment of a lifeless lunarscape. Such is the measure of the 40 years of aerospace progress since Lindbergh's New York to Paris journey. Just as Lindbergh's flight began to shrink the world, Surveyor and other spacecraft are beginning to shrink outer space. Astronauts will be the modern-day Lindberghs in silvery pressure suits. Aviation has made vast strides since Lindbergh was attracted to Ryan Airlines in 1927 by the M1 monoplane, then being used on the West Coast airmail route. 5 years before, T. Claude Ryan, a young Army Air Corps Reserve pilot, ended his active service and opened a sightseeing and charter business in San Diego, California, that in a few years became the first regularly scheduled year-round airline passenger service in the United States, the Los Angeles-San Diego Airlines. When the government decided to award airmail contracts to private firms, Ryan designed a more efficient aircraft to make the airmail business profitable. He conceived the M1, a fast monoplane of clean, high-wing design, capable of cruising 115 miles per hour and of carrying a 600-pound payload. The M1's performance was spectacular for its day. Its use by the airmail lines attracted Charles A. Lindbergh, then an airmail pilot operating out of St. Louis. On February 3rd, 1927, Ryan was handed a telegram from Lindbergh. Can you construct whirlwind engine plane capable of flying non-stop between New York and Paris? Stop. If so, please state cost and delivery date. After consulting with Donald Paul, Ryan Airlines' first full-time engineer, Ryan sent this reply. Can build planes similar to M1, but with larger wings capable of making flight. Cost about $6,000 without motor and instruments. Delivery about 3 months. The Ryan Spirit of St. Louis was born carrying the now famous tail designation NYP, New York to Paris, NX 211. An atmosphere of tension pervaded the small Ryan factory during construction of the plane. Lindbergh was everywhere, peering over workmen's shoulders and checking every detail. He spent hours studying navigation charts in the plant. In late April, the crew of 35 men and women finished the aircraft. On April 28th, exactly 60 days after work on the Spirit began, Lindbergh flew the aircraft on its first test hop over San Diego Bay. He made a quick takeoff, spiraled to 2,000 feet, and flew the Spirit for 20 minutes on its maiden flight. Meanwhile, back at the fish cannery where the Spirit had been built, the Ryan team celebrated the first test flight with a midday banquet. May 10, 1927, Lindbergh left San Diego for St. Louis and New York. Then at 7:52 a.m., May 20th, the Spirit left Roosevelt Field, Long Island for the 33-hour, 30-minute flight to Lindbergh Aerodrome, Paris, France. In darkness, Lindbergh landed the Spirit at 10:22 p.m. French time, May 21st. Through the past 40 years, it has been impossible to separate the Spirit of Lindbergh from his Ryan monoplane. His constant reference to "we" has rendered the two inseparable in the magnitude of the accomplishment. Ryan had sold his interest in Ryan Airlines only weeks before the Spirit was built, but stayed with the company as general manager during the construction of the plane. Lindbergh perhaps best understood Ryan's role, for years later, in autographing a copy of his book, The Spirit of St. Louis, he wrote, "To Claude Ryan, who built the company that built the Spirit of St. Louis." The Spirit of St. Louis wrote a golden page in aviation history. The Ryan name was emblazoned on the tail, and the present Ryan Aeronautical Company carries on the proud heritage of that romantic period. Several years after the Spirit flight, in the early 30s, Ryan continued to project his ideas of modern monoplane design by developing the Ryan ST sport trainer. It was America's first metal fuselage, low-wing aircraft. A popular sport plane, it also had the desired characteristics for efficient training. Hundreds were built for commercial operators and sportsman pilots. Using the new ST as a trainer, the Ryan School of Aeronautics won a worldwide reputation and was selected as one of 9 to undertake the primary training of more than 10,000 pilots in 1939. Ryan operated 3 schools and built more than 1,000 trainers, including the PT-16, PT-20, PT-21, and PT-22. The trainers included seaplanes. Ryan also realized the potential for executive aircraft for business and pleasure, and in 1938 the Ryan SC sport cabin made its debut. It too was the first private owner cabin aircraft to take full advantage of all metal construction and full cantilever low-wing efficiency. The SC of 30 years ago had the same executive styling concepts and about the same performance as today's comparable executive aircraft. Had the SC remained in production was halted by the war, the aircraft line would have evolved as almost the configuration of the Ryan Navion, an aircraft for which Ryan acquired the rights in 1948. More than 1,000 Navions were built by Ryan. Revolutionary new ideas continued to flow from Ryan, and in the early 1940s, the YO-51 Dragonfly was developed. On test flights, the Dragonfly was a steep climbing, almost vertical landing aircraft. Hardly more than 50 feet was required to take off and land. In the mid-40s, Ryan launched engineering studies that would establish the company as the world leader in the design and development of high-performance jet vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. This historic era began with the famed FR-1 Fireball and the Dark Shark. Then, as early as 1947, Ryan engineers began to study jet engines in a vertical test stand. 5 years later, a lightly tethered rig made the world's first free-hovering jet flight by remote control. The concept was continually refined until Peter F. Girard, on November 24, 1953, made the world's first piloted jet hovering flight. The X-13 Vertijet that followed was so graceful during flight tests that observers soon named the aircraft's dramatic hover maneuvers the Vertijet Ballet. Following the great achievements of the Vertijet, Ryan V-Stall engineers developed the Vertiplane. With its huge flaps and wing plates, the Vertiplane looked awkward on the ground. But in the air, it was a second-generation Dragonfly using propeller slipstream for control. Vertiplane tests contributed valuable data several years later to final design of the present-day tilt-wing transport. This huge aircraft, the largest of its kind, was designed and built by the three-company team of Ryan, LTV, and Hiller. It will carry 32 passengers for 8,000 pounds of cargo 200 to 300 miles at speeds up to 350 miles per hour. Now, with a history of more than 3 million man-hours experience, Ryan has evolved as the world leader in the design and flight tests of high-performance jet vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And today, Ryan's Vertifan concept is the world's most efficient high-performance vertical takeoff and landing jet aircraft system with broad applications to almost every kind of jet aircraft. The Vertifan concept, first envisioned by Ryan engineers in 1957, uses lifting fans either in the wings or fuselage to convert jet engine thrust to vertical lift. The system allows jet aircraft to land and take off from an area no larger than a tennis court, yet fly over 500 miles per hour. Ryan engineers have also developed high-performance pilotless jet aircraft called Firebee. Development required the perfect match of jet aircraft and electronic controls to make the Firebee respond as if a human pilot was aboard. And from the design and test of aircraft that would take off and land vertically, hovering controls were developed for aircraft and helicopters, allowing pilots to perform hands-off hovering maneuvers. In recent years, these same basic systems, though now much more sophisticated, have been applied to the task of landing space vehicles on the moon. The Ryan landing radar system in the Surveyor 3 spacecraft was a descendant of these earlier helicopter hovering devices. Before the end of the decade, astronauts, the modern-day Lindberghs, will land on the moon, assisted by a Ryan landing radar system. Today, as we observe the 40th anniversary of Lindbergh's epic flight in the spirit of St. Louis, the accomplishments of the past 40 years seem almost overwhelming. Ryan Aeronautical Company is proud to have contributed to and participated in some of the major achievements of these 4 decades. What will come in the next 40 years? It is hard to tell, for every day there is another Lindbergh, somewhere, ready with courage to reach out for new and challenging goals.